As we await that briefing at the Pentagon to begin, let's bring in Morgan Ortagus, former State Department spokesperson and founder of Polaris National Security. Morgan, welcome to you. Thanks for joining us. What are your thoughts?
Good afternoon.
As we are expecting this formal announcement from the Pentagon just a short time from now?
Well, I think it's sort of important to level set expectations of what the U.S. military can and cannot do at the border. So the U.S. military, Sandra, cannot enforce immigration policy. They can do things like build the border wall, build infrastructure, right? We saw the Army Corps of Engineers were actually going to do that in the Trump administration. That was one of the proposals. They can also do admin functions, right? So they could, because we did have 1,100, if not more, border agents that left the job in 2022 because a myriad of reasons, but a lot of them citing, being very frustrated with the policies of the Biden administration. So the military could come in and do admin functions, for example. But what can they not do? You know, they can't get into shooting wars, right, with the cartels. They can't arrest immigrants who are illegally crossing. They can't do any of those things, but they can free up border agents by doing some of the admin, by doing some of the infrastructure work. I also think it's important to remember, why do we have to make this announcement today? Why do we have to do this? And it's because this administration is not blind. They see and they know what's going to happen. They see the images that you're showing throughout the day, Sandra, of the border towns and what will happen just a few weeks and days now, a matter of days, whenever Title 42 will end. And I think that's one of the reasons why the administration was forced to make this announcement today.
We're just getting a little bit more information from the Pentagon ahead of hearing from Brigadier General Pat Ryder in just a moment. At the request of the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Austin has approved a temporary Department of Defense increase of an additional 1,500 military personnel to supplement U.S. Customs and Border Protection efforts on the U.S. southwest border. Furthermore, this statement reads, for 90 days, these 1,500 military personnel will fill critical capability gaps such as ground-based detection and monitoring. These are the details that emerged earlier. Data entry and warehouse support until CBP can address these needs through the contracted support. Military personnel will not directly participate in these law enforcement activities. This deployment to the border is consistent with other forms of military support to DHS over many years. To that point, Morgan, can you look back at when we saw similar measures taken under the Trump administration?
Yeah, this did happen in the Trump administration. I think the Obama administration, the Bush administration as well. So it's not new, but it's important to note that it should be temporary, right? I think it was around 2018-19 whenever you saw a temporary surge at the border. The Trump administration quickly moved to get that under control. So while it has been used by other administrations, this should not be the solution for the fact that the Biden administration has not properly funded DHS, has not properly funded Border Patrol and their agents, and they need to be fully funded. They need support. They need support not only financially to be able to get more agents in and to be able to retain qualified and experienced agents, but they need some political support as well. You know, these officers that are literally on the front lines of our border do not feel that the Biden administration has their back. It's not reflected in the budget. So temporary measures and utilizing the U.S. military are fine, but this should be a salve, right? This should not be a solution for underfunding our U.S. Border Patrol.
Morgan, good afternoon. Bill Hemmer here. Thank you. Just want to revert back to a poll we did about 2 weeks ago. A little less than that. Of the 7 major issues that we polled, the disapproval numbers in immigration for this administration were at 61%. People are paying attention when numbers are that high.
Absolutely. And it's because of the images. It's because people in border towns are being affected. And by the way, it's not just affecting Republicans, right? It's affecting Democrats and independents and people who aren't voters. The American people aren't blind. They know whenever there has not been a real solution offered. I mean, I looked at the State Department press release on Title 42, and it said that they were going to start enforcing Title 8. Well, why haven't you been enforcing Title 8 for the past 2 years, right? again, I'm not against sort of temporary measures to stem the flow of illegal immigrants, but what are we actually doing? What are the long-term policies that we're putting in place? You know, the vice president is supposed to be in charge of the border. Last time I checked, I haven't seen her there. She's supposed to be in charge of root causes of illegal immigration. And, you know, she is going to potentially, if President Biden is reelected, she would assume a lot more responsibility, as you would have the oldest president ever running for reelection and going into a second term.
And in fact,
I think we need to start.
Yeah, her strategy has been to blame Republicans. You know, she and the White House have made the case that Republicans are getting in the way of immigration reform. There's this back and forth that's happening with the Chicago mayor and Greg Abbott of Texas. Abbott blamed the immigration crisis on Biden's open border policies, and Chicago saying, hey, stop sending buses of migrants to our city. We can't handle it anymore. We don't have the resources. KJP, and by the way, Abbott told Chicago to take their complaints to the White House. KJP was asked about that just a moment ago in the White House briefing, and she responded with this. Morgan, listen.
It's unfortunate that Governor Abbott continues to play politics with migrants and with the American people. Because what he's doing, that's what it looks like. It looks like a political stunt instead of trying to address the situation, or maybe get the congressional members and senators that are in his state to actually ask them to work with us on truly dealing with a problem, with trying to figure out how do we deal with immigration reform. Instead of doing that, he wants to play politics. So that's what we've seen from this governor. It's not surprising.
All right, so she says Abbott's playing politics. But you know what, Morgan? You know what the reality is for so many of these residents of these cities who are seeing influx of migrants? A real economic perilous situation. And Chicago's been very specific, and you can obviously point out the many ways that they haven't dealt with this. And they are led by a Democrat in that city and that state. But they're dealing with the reality of this crisis on the ground. They do not have the resources to accommodate the continued flow into their state and into the city of Chicago. So they're speaking up, they're saying something about it, and that's real, Morgan.
Listen, this administration has no solutions for Governor Abbott. If they did, then Governor Abbott wouldn't have an unprecedented number of illegal immigrants in his state. So what would they actually like Governor Abbott and these mayors? By the way, many Democrats in the border towns, Democrat officials, it's not just Republicans. I think it's important to note that Democrats in these border towns have been very critical of the Biden administration as well, and the lack of a plan. So comprehensive immigration reform that is bipartisan, would that be a great thing? Would the American people like to see that? Sure. Is that going to solve the problem of thousands of migrants coming over the border and the deluge that we will likely see in the coming days and weeks when Title 42 expires? That's not going to solve the immediate problem. So Governor Abbott is doing everything that he can do to protect his people, and he is sending it also to cities who have often claimed to be cities that are going to be a refuge to illegal immigrants. By the way, we forget, and I was down there, Fox actually interviewed me from the border August of last year. I went down there and spoke and heard countless stories of women and teenage girls that are raped and that are trafficked. We have a human rights catastrophe for Latina, for teenage Hispanic women that this administration is basically completely ignoring. And by having basically no policy and by having no plan to protect and secure your border, you are encouraging these cartels who are now making billions of dollars off of human trafficking to continue this behavior that is directly harming and sexually abusing teenage girls and young women. And someone has to put a stop to it.
We're going to get right to the
back with Morgan Ortagus. A quick response on this, Morgan, and what we think we might be able to expect once you get 1,500 troops down there.
Yeah, just as we said earlier, no law enforcement capabilities, but they will be for 90 days, as the spokesperson just pointed out, assisting DHS and CPB. Again, as I've noted, this should be temporary, and it should be a sign for the administration to actually increase their support and funding of DHS so that these border agents are able to actually properly handle this flow. And ultimately, this situation, these pictures that you're showing, are only going to get worse in the coming weeks and months. The administration is not going to be able to avoid this problem and just pray that the nightly news doesn't show it anymore. There's just too many reporters and too many Americans of both sides of the aisle speaking out.
We'll see about that. We've had a reporter on the border for 2.5 years. And as far as we can tell, no other networks even come close to that. Smitty.
I think you almost have to just keep reiterating like why this matters. When Title 42 is lifted, what that will look like. CBP statistics, Morgan, right now show that only 46% of migrant encounters at the border have resulted in a Title 42 expulsion. So when that goes away, you're already looking at a massive surge at the border. When that goes away, all those people, that is a situation that will only get worse. And this is an administration who is not saying that they're doing anything to address that right now. In fact, there's a blame game happening, Morgan.
Well, and don't forget that this is a billions and billions of dollar enterprise for the cartels, this human smuggling operation. So the cartels can also read the news and understand that Title 42 is ending, and they know what they can take advantage of. They know how to get people across. So we are essentially enabling billions of dollars of illicit money to go towards the cartels, the same cartels that are taking the chemicals precursors from China and are trafficking fentanyl, that is the number one killer of young people in this country. And so you're going to see drugs over the border increase. You're going to see illegal immigration. And as I said earlier, unfortunately, you're going to see the harassment of women also increase because of these policies. And just calling on the Congress for immigration reform is fine. Sure, the Congress should absolutely act. But that is an attempt by the press secretary to deflect from the images that you're showing today.
One last point on here. Nikki Haley just tweeted, here's an idea. Reimpose Title 42, close the border, as opposed to sending troops.
Morgan, final thought on the State Department, different issue here, on the State Department spokesperson responding to Fox on this Pakistan program on transgender issues. Let's listen first. Oh, this is a full screen. We'll put it up on the screen. In this specific grant, the department provides funding for English language learning, an integral skill that helps unlock educational and employability opportunities for marginalized communities, in this case, transgender youth. What is the discussion that is happening around this, Morgan?
The whole grant that the State Department put out, or they put out an RPF, which is to try to get people to bid on this. For me and my former colleagues at the State Department, we were perplexed by this. I mean, first of all, we do teach English language around the world, and we should. Trying to specifically focus them on transgender community in a country like Pakistan doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, first of all, if you think about this from a security perspective, who is making the list of who the transgendered people are? How do you have any accountability of that? Would it making a list and sort of outing such people actually harm them in a country like Pakistan, where it's illegal to be a person in the LGBTQ community? What I would say, when you peel this back and look at the bigger picture, every time we do these public diplomacy programs around the world, every officer, every Foreign Service officer, every person evaluating these programs should ask themselves, does this advance the American interest? Is this worth spending taxpayer money over? And moreover, when you look at a country like Pakistan that is completely subservient to the Chinese Communist Party at this point, I would argue that our aid should be much more focused on their next door neighbor, India, which is the future, which is the largest democracy in the world right now, and a country that is critical for us to have as a friend and hopefully ally in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party.
Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you, Morgan.
More to come on that. Morgan Ortagus, thank you for your time today. Pentagon